Okay, so we're on our second class of Perelandra, and we had 3 chapters to do. 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Great. So most of you had already read chapter 2 to start off with, so that was probably just whether you skimmed it again or just sort of, I remember, but moved on hopefully then to 3 and 4. So it was kind of a lot page-wise to go over, maybe more than we normally do. But hopefully everybody was okay with the amount that we did. And I think it was a better stopping place at the end of 4 than it would have been at the end of 3. Like, I think we got a little bit more of the narrative, a little further in the story, and a little more to chew on, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom didn't like chapter 3, so we had to give him a chance to like chapter 4. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't.
Yep, chapter 4 was much better.
Okay, good. Chapter 4 was better. We get the Tom seal of approval. Okay, so why don't we then just we'll start back off with where we were, beginning of chapter 2, and we'll start just kind of going over as the story progresses. So we spent chapter 1 just getting reacquainted with the circumstances, with the narrator who is supposedly C.S. Lewis himself, and getting really freaked out and panicked about getting to his friend's house, Elwin Ransom, who has filled him in on his visit to Mars, but just getting to Ransom's house has been a difficult experience for Lewis. He's been worried, he's been scared, he's been anxious, he's been almost panicked. And now, when he couldn't bear it anymore, being in Ransom's house all by himself and there in the dark and with this coffin-looking thing, and then experiencing a spiritual being, an El Deal, right in front of him, with him about to lose his mind, that's when Ransom comes back. And so chapter 2 is really kind of them talking through what's about to happen and what's going on. So one of the things that I hope was made a little more clear, based off of Ransom's explanations in chapter 2, do you understand C.S. Lewis's anxiety in chapter 1 a little differently? We talked about it, but only as chapter 1. We didn't really include anything later on. So it was just kind of about the common sense of, if you could picture yourself in that same situation, you would be pretty panicked. But what does Ransom say that adds a different dimension to Lewis's panic?
I never say the word, word affecting C.S. Lewis. They were making him feel this.
These El Deal, these malign El Deal of our silent planet were all over the place, and we're all over him. So does it make perfect sense that he would be worried and anxious? I think so. But what happens when you find someone who's nervous or anxious and you start whispering to them about how bad things are? So it only got worse. Kind of mentioned this last week too, like, personally, I don't need an enemy other than myself. I managed to cause enough trouble to myself without needing anybody's help. But being egged on only makes it worse. Being encouraged to do wrong and stupid things only makes it harder to not do them. So C.S. Lewis, and the funny thing is, all the while he's weighing his options, right? Do I join in this new world that I'm kind of afraid of, because the reality of being confronted with spiritual beings and truths and this macrocosmic sort of reality, I would probably prefer to be ignorant. And he's kind of, weighing it, like, if I take one more step, I can't ignore it anymore. when the reality was he had been fighting it the whole time. So maybe, just maybe, there's something to be said. Ignorance might be bliss, but sometimes it's better to know what's really going on. If you have a mysterious pain and you go to the doctor to get tested, there's certain things we don't want to hear, right?
Yeah, right.
And until we hear them one way or the other, in our imaginations, at least, it could be anything or nothing. But once we hear certain things, it changes stuff. Changes your reality to have somebody say cancer. It changes.
Well, that's if, unless the diagnosis confirms our worst expectation.
I would agree with you that we can be thinking about it, and that can be kind of our worst case scenario. But I honestly think there's a difference between fearing something and being told, yes, it's true. Like something, it's some different level. And I think that's kind of what Lewis has maybe been facing. And what if we face that same thing? We can ignore spiritual realities around us. We can choose to just kind of not be bothered or ignore it, or just sort of assume, well, one way or the other, what difference could it make for me knowing? Or maybe it does make a difference to know one way or the other.
I think when we ignore it or try to make believe it's not the way it seems, we get ourselves in more trouble.
I think that's definitely a risk. And so anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting realization that kind of unfolds in chapter 2, but it's a realization not just for C.S. Lewis, I think it's a realization for us too. And I think that's going to happen a lot. There's going to be these little insights that happen throughout the book. We're going to get a couple of them in chapter 3 and 4. But I think these are insights intended for us to kind of ponder and think through. What's kind of the rough outline then, if somebody wants to share, about why C.S. Lewis is there? What has Ransom asked him to come and do? Come help him, but do what?
In the coffin.
Okay, he needs somebody to put him in the coffin, but and get him out when he comes back. So what's going on? Why does he need to get in and out of the coffin?
That's how it's going to travel.
Travel where?
To Perelandra.
And why is he going? Because he's now kind of laying out a fuller story.
Well, he's been invited to go to the method of transportation is being provided for him.
That's right. So he's being invited to go. The method of transportation is being provided for him, and it's that coffin. He needs people. He needs someone to come and help. He's going to need actually a little team. A little team of people. So he kind of invites Lewis to find some trustworthy folks. They even talk about a couple of them who will be necessary along the way. He's thought this through. You know, there's some nuts and bolts and practicalities to this. And Lewis almost didn't realize how thought through it was. To the point where Ransom has left the will. Now, why has he left the will? In case he doesn't come back. There's no guarantee here. There's no guarantee. Now, Lewis is not in this will. And Ransom wants to make sure he knows it's not a slight. Why is he not listed in the will? And this seems weird to even be talking about, but he lays it all out because he's thought through this.
Because people may think he was murdered and he doesn't want Lewis to be the one blamed.
That's right. And it's a tiny little detail, but think about how practically minded this all is. You know, he wants to get a doctor involved.
Yeah.
He's laid out some stuff about his estate, but he's kind of taken care to make sure that, you know, if this guy just disappears and he never comes back, there will be a police investigation at some point.
Well, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. Now we know he comes back because we're reading this book. but it's just kind of fun to see that they're these somewhat mundane details, but actually pretty important and critical that have been considered and thought out. And even Lewis is a little bit blown away by how complicated this is going to turn out to be. So there's all sorts of stuff on the earthly end, and he's kind of giving Lewis some pretty important responsibilities, and he's showing him the things that he's sort of set up to help him accomplish that. But he also lets him in a bit on the greater plan, at least to the degree that he knows it. Why is Ransom being invited to Perelandra?
He was successful in his prior trip.
He was successful in Mars and Malacandra.
He learned the language. Yeah, and he was able to communicate, and they understood him and they trusted him.
That's right.
The other.
In many ways, he had kind of proven himself. Now, is it chance or is it providence? Is it the working out of our choices, or is it the will of God that in the bizarre, almost random seeming circumstances that the two scientists who create a spaceship to go to Mars wind up kidnapping, of all people, a philologist, an expert in languages, who then winds up being able to communicate so thoroughly with everybody who's there.
And they wanted to make a sacrifice.
That's right.
And they ended up just.
So now there's something it's been a little bit implied, but it's worth stating. There is something surprisingly critical about what Ransom learned on Mars.
Language.
What about the language that's surprisingly critical?
It's from the old.
Original language.
Right.
What everybody could understand.
Yes. So basically, there is a common language on Malacandra. Now, these individual species, I get the impression, have variations and dialects, and maybe even a private language. There's a common language that he learned, which he now refers to as Old Solar. And that seems to be a common language, if not of the solar system, of the solar system, if not the universe as a whole. He's learned, in essence, what must be a heavenly language. Because it now comes, because I know Old Solar, I will be able to communicate on Venus, not just Mars. Imagine an alien landing in America, and they spend months here, and they learn American English. But then they were sent back from their home planet, but they were sent to Japan or Morocco or Russia. How useful would their English American knowledge be? Pretty dang limited, if useless. One of the things that happens, again, it's not chance, this is providence. As they would say in Old Solar, the will of Maleldil. But God's will worked out. That Ransom now knows a common, universal, and potentially even heavenly language. So he is the choice to be sent to the next planet. Now, what else about this journey or job or quest is he able to explain?
It sounds to me that perhaps behind it all, there is a bigger plan. Not fate, It involves the whole world.
Okay, so you said a bigger plan, and you said, no, not plan, a fate that involves the whole world. I'm gonna back you up, and I'm saying, I think it is a plan. I think it's precisely what it is. There is a plan,
Yeah, by evil forces.
and there's maybe a plan by evil forces, but I think there's absolutely a plan by Malelville. This is God's will being worked out, and something big is happening. Something big is happening within our solar system. Something big that will most likely impact our world at some level. But in order to do that, something needs to happen in a different world first. Ransom will be the one sent. So, exactly what that's going to entail. Does he have any idea? Exactly
No.
what this project is going to look like. Does he have any idea?
No,
I don't think so. He's basically said, it's their business. I'll just do what I'm told. Like, how does this craft work? I don't know. When am I going to get back? I don't know. What am I going to find when I get there? I don't know.
Take it all in faith.
He's absolutely taking it in faith. And this is a faith that, I think has evidence for it, especially within his trip to Mars, but there's also a certainty to him about it. There are things that I don't know and I don't have to know, and that's okay. And I'm not going to worry too much about it. It is Oyarsa's business to get me there safely, so I'm just not even going to worry about it. It's not worth fretting, I hope I live or survive or whatever. If he wants me to be there, he'll make it happen. It is what it is. So I just, it's just kind of a neat, I think, I'm not even gonna call it a change in perspective, because Ransom, even from the beginning, I think has been described as a faithful man. But it's more of a development and a maturity of that faith.
The one thing the reason why I mentioned that it was something evil is on page 21, his answer. The other thing is the black ocean, is meditating some sort of attack.
Yes.
So
something is
there,
afoot.
something.
And, we're called Fulcandra, the silent planet, because we're under siege. Not under siege by the bad guy. The bad guy's here already. We're trapped with him. The siege is to make sure the bad guy, the bent Oyarsa of Earth, doesn't spread that malice places. Well, after all of this time of being pretty much cornered in or caged in, it sounds like something is happening from here to there, an attempt to break the siege. So being a siege is a waiting game. You circle the castle or the fort or whatever, and you try to starve them out. Well, when you're inside the fort, you're relatively safe. But if you know they're trying to starve you out, and eventually you do run low on food and water and supplies, you really only have two options. Well, okay, three options. The first option is surrender. The second option is fight. The third option is to try to sneak through or break out. So it seems like there may be a plan of Satan to sneak through or to break out, and the target is Venus. So the sort of sobering thing, because our battles are not against flesh and blood, but principalities and forces, and Satan versus an English academic. Those are some big stakes for such a singular person. But isn't that, in essence, like God? To use the humble to shame the mighty. All right, so chapter 2 actually ends in a somewhat unexpected fashion. Chapter 2 ends almost as though it's the end of the book. Because what happens in the end of chapter 2?
He's returned from Venus.
He's back.
Yeah,
So everything that happens in the rest of the book happens within the pages of chapter 2, in essence. He leaves and he comes back, and then he tells the story, which is the rest of the book. So, couple of things. What do you notice about Ransom when he's back? What's different, or what's unusual or noteworthy about his return?
Different,
He looks different. How does he look?
younger.
He looks younger. What else?
His behavior is even more strange than when he came back from Alejandra.
How strange in what way? Do you recall?
He was more, I don't know if humble's the right word, but he was a quieter soul and a more humble soul, a more peaceful soul.
Some truly remarkable perspective was granted to him. And it's almost like he's seeing very simple things as significant, and a lot of things we find important just didn't really bother him anymore. You can see some effects on his body, like he's not used to the cold anymore.
That business about the cut on his.
Now he's got a cut on his heel, and even the doctor notices that. And it doesn't want to stop bleeding. It's not a lot. It's not like a dangerous wound, but it doesn't seem to fully heal. And what's one last thing that you might have remembered about that was noteworthy about his return? When they opened up the coffin, what did they find? Flowers. He was covered in flower petals. So I think he's laid a few clues for us to discover later on. We've now seen the end product. Everything else is going to be, how in the world did we get there? All right, so let's move on to chapter 3. Now, a lot of chapter 3 and even some of chapter 4 is going to be reminiscent maybe of some of the earlier middle chapters of the first book, where there's a lot of description, but the description doesn't make a ton of sense. And C.S. Lewis has a way about him as an author where he can be very vivid and very descriptive, especially emotionally, but describing things that you really can't describe. How, for instance, could you describe to someone what it feels like to be dizzy? How could you describe to someone what it feels like to be in childbirth? How do you describe to someone, visiting a place that you've never seen before, that you have no context of whatsoever? And so there's a lot of descriptions, and a lot of them are very vivid with images and colors and descriptions and stuff, but they feel very stream of consciousness almost. Don't feel real concrete, because he's giving us the impression of what Ransom experienced. Like, these things don't compute. So he's describing what he sees, but he didn't understand what he sees. How do you describe something you don't understand? So we get a lot of the space journey kind of, and then his, kind of first moments there on Venus. Is there anything noteworthy to you or that you recall from the journey there?
Completely different than the previous journey.
Right?
Can't even walk well. And I think we're getting an idea that the challenges are going to be totally different.
Yes.
And that it's going to be, he's going to be meeting different, I guess, people or creatures.
Right?
The language may not, well, I don't know if the language
Right. So he, if we remember his journey to Mars, the first one, it was frightening. It was also glorious. He was experiencing not the coldness of space, but the life of deep heaven. But he was also in fear of his life. He had no idea how this machine worked. He didn't even really know where he was going. He just knew that he was going to some other place. And he was able to describe some of the mechanisms of the ship and various things. But this one, he's kind of like in suspended animation for most of it, right? He regains some awareness near to the end. But do you remember stuff about how horribly cold or horribly hot the journey was to Mars?
Mhm.
And this one, what is it like?
He feels a little cold and hot on
At the
same time on each
Right.
side of his body, but it wasn't unbearable.
That's right. Like it's definitely sensations, like some extreme sensations, but nothing as terrible as the trip to Mars. He can feel cold and hot, and maybe it's the sun on one side and space on the other, but he's aware of very little of it because he only kind of, he sort of rests peacefully through most of it. And then even the entry, while it's somewhat disconcerting and he's trying to describe like how he's entering the atmosphere and how he's getting there, at no point does it ever seem particularly dangerous or scary, just sort of hard to understand. I want to skip back just a second because I'd forgotten that chapter 3 sort of starts off with a little bit more, like a page or two about Ransom after Venus and what the sort of person he becomes. And one of it is the stuff he says. Like there's a little side commentary about Lewis getting into a debate with a friend and colleague who is either an atheist or an agnostic, who's poking at the the flaws and logic of the resurrection. Are you going to have a stomach and a palate because you don't eat anything? And how ridiculous is that? And won't that frustrate you? And now, instead of engaging in sort of the earthly follow of logic like Lewis is doing, what's the sort of thing Ransom might interject?
He talked about being a difference between a transensuous life and a non-sensuous life.
Yeah.
Well, with what his study, whatever his school is, that's probably very easily understood for most of us.
Right.
At least for me.
Well, but I'm going to say that's not even his philology. I think that's his experience on Venus.
Okay.
I think his mind has been opened to some of these greater realities and he understands better. And it's like, we can only see and know what we can see and know. And our logic and C.S. Lewis is a huge proponent of logic. Logic where every step follows by necessity and extension the step before. That's a good way of thinking, but you have to be very careful of your logic not being what they refer to as spurious. If your premise is wrong, you can follow every step correctly along the way and get a wrong answer, right? If you're doing an algebra problem that's multiple steps, or even a long division problem, step, subtract, multiply, subtract, and you get one little arithmetic error early on, it doesn't matter how perfectly you follow all the rest of the steps, your answer is wrong.
Yes.
In essence, Ransom almost gave a Jesus-like answer to the Pharisees to say, you've misunderstood the question. And here's what I think is worth pointing out. The colleague is focusing on the stuff about focusing, well, how would a resurrected body look? And are you think those atoms and stuff like that? He's kind of nitpicking at it. And, if you had a stomach but never used it, if you had genitals but never used them, and what's the point? And would that be frustrating or excessive or unnecessary? And when Ransom says trans-sensuous versus non-sensuous, let me just say, that's a super cool little phrase that's worth us understanding. Do I know what the resurrection of the dead will look like? No. But I trust that it will happen and God's going to work that out. So, what's the difference between non and trans? Non means not, nothing, or don't. Trans means across, or different, or changed, or above. There's a difference between not wanting to eat and not being able to eat. There's a difference between not being able to touch and feel and not needing to touch or feel. You follow? If you opened up your fridge and it's totally empty, right? You have a different response if you're starving or if you're full. If you're starving, it's a frustration. It's an annoyance. It's a danger. If you're full, it's just interesting or noteworthy, or it just is what it is. Perhaps in the resurrection, our bodies are so fulfilled in their true and eternal purpose that stuff like eating and sex is just sort of unnecessary. You don't even worry about it anymore. Some of these questions, you are so above, over, and beyond them, they become immaterial.
One of these other sentences, well, it is too definite for language.
Yeah. Right. Have you ever thought about describing something that's so important you can't describe it? Have you ever thought about how to talk about something that's so real and so important and so critical that even your description doesn't do it justice? For a very, very simple example, when Lula and I got married, we were very lonely when we moved up to seminary, up in rural Tennessee on top of a mountain, and we got a dog. And she was the best dog ever. And when she got really sick years ago and we had to put her to sleep, it was profoundly hard. And I did what I sometimes feel like I have to do and write it out. And writing and trying to describe who that little dog was and what she meant to all of us, I remember thinking even my words were sort of cheapening it. Sometimes all you can say is she was a good dog. And anything that I added to that actually almost took something away. Even seemed like very, very, it almost made it less somehow. I think that's what he's talking about. A reality that is so sharp and concrete and so powerful that even trying to describe it, there's no good way to do it. The descriptions and even words don't really have the way to capture the truth. All right. So more on chapter 3. So interestingly enough, kind of like how it was slowly revealed to us in the last book, that the geography of Mars, he actually patterned off of our, or at least then, the contemporary astronomical understanding of a dead, barren surface of Mars, but with these ridges and canals and fissures and valleys. It's just, we didn't see that. We didn't realize that until near the end of the book, that we weren't actually seeing the surface of Mars at all. we were seeing deep down within those fissures that you can even see today on a telescope. So the fact that Venus has this immense cloud cover that almost like the sky itself is almost like a golden dome. That's actually based off of contemporary astronomical understandings about Venus. That Venus has this impenetrable atmosphere that's so it's so gaseously dense that what we see when we look is just the outside of its atmosphere, but not the actual surface of the planet itself. If anything, perhaps that's why Venus is so luminous. Like when you see a bright star, the biggest, brightest star, well, sometimes it turns out to be Venus that you're seeing and not a star at all. So we get a little bit of a description of that. This almost the firmament of the heavens. He even likens it to a medieval depiction where the dome of the sky is golden. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So he lands there, and what does he find? Like how does he encounter the surface of Venus? What is the surface of Venus? Well, he didn't even get that for a while. We get a whole chapter of what?
Describing in colors and
Amazing colors that even colors don't, the word color doesn't do justice for. And he winds up in some sort of water. He's landed in an ocean.
He first went to a very viscous fluid, or it felt like that to him,
Yes,
and his coffin became fluid. And then he ends up in the waves going up and down.
Yeah.
That ended up on an island.
yeah, so
Um,
the ship sort of dissolves, kind of like the one coming back from Mars. And whether it's the ship that's the liquid or the firmament that's liquid or the ocean that's the liquid, he has this kind of transitional experience that's difficult to describe. And what he really first understands, sights and sounds and smells, is he finds himself in an ocean.
in water.
Now, what can you describe about this ocean?
he mentioned several different.
What was the question?
What do you say about it?
Yeah, what can you describe?
It had
about-
huge waves.
He mentioned several different colors.
Several different colors.
Down beige, and that's a mustard color, and then ultramarine, which is deep blue. And it's like a stone, lapis lazuli,
Yes, yeah, that's kind of it's a purpley blue.
beautiful blue.
Yeah.
But it's not a soda. It's drinkable, the water.
Oh, right,
Yes,
right.
yes. So there's amazing colors. It seems to be deeper and vibrant than any ocean, more multicolored than any ocean on Earth, and it's drinkable. There seems to be a hint of mineral to it, but it's not salty like our oceans. What else does he notice?
The waves are like mountainous.
Okay, so there seems to be a lot of variation. Sometimes it's very calm. Sometimes the waves are big enough to be hills that when you're in the trough, you can't see anything other than water. And then some of them he describes like a mountain rushing straight at him. And yet, these waves, he never describes, at least in this part of it, fear or real danger. Why?
Because he went with the waves.
He did go with the waves, but how did he know he would?
It just happened so quickly.
Right? Right? There's almost no time to be worried. I'm going to suggest that he's got a pervasive attitude we saw from the beginning about this coffin. Basically, I have been called here and sent here. It's their business to keep me alive.
Yeah.
Like if they brought me here to drown, then I guess I'm gonna drown, but I don't think so. So they're probably gonna make sure that I don't drown. And this is a survivable, like he's not going to be sent in a location that he just could not rationally survive. Even the water feels different than earthly water, but it is drinkable. But it doesn't, like, if we were in the ocean bobbing up and down, even as good swimmers, eventually we would wear out and we would just die. And that's not the issue here. He's very buoyant and he just sort of travels these waves. It's probably a little disconcerting, but it doesn't at this point seem to be dangerous. But it is very, very unearthly. So is there no land?
He doesn't see any.
Right. He sees no land at all anywhere. He starts off and for a long time, all there is the open ocean. I don't like open ocean. It weirds me out. When I've been out on a boat far enough, I find it disconcerting. And no matter how big that boat is, it suddenly feels very small. So you are now a planet away. You are not in a boat. You are bobbing in the water. And there's just nothing. So already I don't know how he's managing this.
There's a lot of things that he talks about. Twilight, almost darkness. Thunder, rain. Animals falling in the rain. Frogs, for example.
Right.
It all just sounds like a night.
Or it sounds like a dream.
Well, yeah.
You know,
right.
and it's funny that you describe that as a nightmare because he's perfectly calm and peaceful. And everything that he describes has this very vivid beauty to it. And it doesn't make a lot of earthly sense. Now, things being unearthly can be nightmarish,
Well, the
but they can also be very dreamlike. But he calls them frog-like. And what if these things aren't frog-like in a creepy way, but frog-like in a super interesting way?
Okay.
And here is one of the things that will be revealed slowly but repeatedly over and over again. Think about all the little pieces and think about what it's been hinted at, and it will be explained later.
I don't have lipstick to you.
This is a young world. Young. Maybe there's not been enough time for the ocean to absorb the dissolved minerals to become salty. So it's not. Maybe these creatures or the colors are just so fresh and so vivid and so alive and so bright because everything is brand new. Nothing is worn out. Nothing is degraded. He's even sort of understanding both in the water and then a little bit later when he does get on the land, that the earthly instinct to fear potential predatory animals was pretty much not the truth in Malacandra. Other than the Nakra, which was kind of an amazing adventure to go on, animals were not a danger, not in a fundamental sense. So whatever he is about to encounter, he's sort of prepared with both faith and an expectation that earthly fear may not have a reason to be here. Okay, so he does finally encounter something on the water. What do we get? I mean, other than the rain and the frogs and stuff. Mats. There seems to be this rubbery vegetation, and he likes talking about tubes and bladders. And if you've ever been in a mangrove where the plants start growing into the ocean, and it's fresh and it's brackish and it's salty, and you'll see a lot of like these mangrove plants, and they have these big giant tendrils that go into the water. And it's like special kind of plants tend to grow in those areas. And I was having visions of stuff like that, or even like here at church, we've got these big split leaf philodendrons everywhere. And before I ripped out the ones that used to live around the pond, they would have these big tubers and tendrils just everywhere. And I'm kind of imagining stuff like that in my mind. So there's this kind of mat, and it's kind of cool. It's fully and completely conformed with the waves. And some are small and some are big. And eventually, what is he able to do? He gets on one. He is able to hang on, not as easy as you thought it would be, because these things are moving. The current is actually pushing it like this entire thing pretty quickly. But it's like land. This one's big enough to almost feel like it has a forest, and to be something you could explore. And he starts realizing, what if the geography itself of Venus is completely flexible? You know, can you imagine every continent, not just shifting shape, but location all over the world? And one day North America is around the Arctic, and one day it's somewhere where Asia normally is, and like we're all floating and spinning and moving around. You know, nobody lives on land, everybody lives in a houseboat almost, you know, the complete changeability of the geography. And even that seems to be just kind of deeply foreign to kind of our concept of, you know, even the words land. So let's get into this last chapter. He's there now describing things, and he's being able to kind of put two and two together as far as making comparisons. These are the things I experienced on Malacandra. So I'm kind of now prepared to look not just with earthly eyes and an earthly understanding, but to maybe look at an alien landscape as being just completely different and trying to figure it out on its own terms.
There was a sentence that interested me.
Yeah.
Said he had thought that he might have been sent to an uninhabited world.
Aha.
This added fear to the profusion of pleasure.
Okay. What if his task is to start this world? He doesn't know. But when he gets there and it seems completely devoid of animal or sentient life, that thought at least occurs to him. Like, what if I am the start of this world? And that's both exciting and frightening. Well, he makes a discovery that he is not alone. First of all, what's the first creature he meets? Yeah, of all things. I mean, not the frogs, but he gets on this island. He finds a dragon. A dragon. And curled around a tree, and he makes a reference to a Greek myth, as though this were the Greek myth come to life. But that's kind of like Malacandra, where the Sorns sort of look like Greek myth, like the Cyclops come to life. And he starts to think maybe some of the myths of our world are echoes or shadows of real things that exist somewhere else. And that's a thought that I think Lewis will entertain throughout this book. But frankly, he has in lots of places and in lots of books. What if some of the truths of this world are echoes or shadows of genuine and eternal things that are far beyond us, but we catch a glimpse of as though through a mirror darkly? So is he able to communicate with his dragon? No. I think at the end of the day, the dragon's just a dragon. I mean, he seems happy enough. He seems more like a dog than a dragon, but
Yeah, when he put his head on.
right, yeah, when my dogs just kind of lean into you, and they're big, so that you know it when they lean into you. And he's just sort of discovering some of the indigenous plant life and figuring out what's so very different about this. What are some of the things he experiences? Okay, he finds some plants that are edible, and he knows the water around him is drinkable, so he can survive here. He can live.
There was a fruit that was, he decided there were bubbles which.
Right. So if we're cataloging the plant life, you've got the stuff interwoven as a mat that makes kind of ground, and it's got the tubes and bladders and stuff, especially stringy at the sides. He also describes this thing that's kind of like a fruit, sort of a spheroid kind of deal, and it seems kind of dense. He describes like banana comes into terms. And then there's another plant that he christens the bubble plant that just seems to draw water from the ocean and up through its own tendrils, adding something about itself along the way, and then starts as a tiny droplet. And then as more water comes, it increases and increases until eventually it's so big, it loses tension and just sort of pops. So he eats one of the banana eggs or whatever that thing was, and enjoys one of the bubble trees. Are those good experiences?
Yeah.
How good?
He was thirsty. It just happened to be there at the right time.
Okay, they happen to be there at the right time.
From being in the ocean so long.
Mhm. Now the banana egg fruit deal, he described as being relatively plain, but plain in a very wholesome and honest way. I think like oatmeal or lentil soup. But between that fruit and the bubble tree, the experience isn't just good. I dare say it's transcendent. It almost changes his reality. They are so startlingly powerful and profound. Like flavor doesn't even begin to describe flavor anymore, and color doesn't seem to be able to capture color, and refreshment and all this sort of stuff. These are indescribable moments. Is it the bubble one where he says, if people on earth could experience this, they would fight wars over being able to feel that moment. It is so unearthly fulfilling. Now, there's something incredibly profound about what he does next, both times. What does he do after the fruit or the bubble tree? Or what does he not do? He doesn't go for seconds. The experience almost seems spiritual. So why not go for, if it's that good, why not go for seconds? He thought about it, but he refrained very purposefully. Why? It seems very natural. If you've had a fantastic piece of cake, it was even better than you thought it would be, and it was just absolutely perfect. Why not get another slice?
It might not be, or it would be a vulgarity.
It would be a vulgarity. It might not be as good. So on Earth, in economics, we have a concept referred to as diminishing marginal return, which means the benefit that you get out of something being repeated is a little less every time.
Yeah.
One Snickers bar is delicious, two Snicker bars in a row is a little much. 3 Snickers bars, you get you sick. 4 Snickers bar and you might die, right? So the diminishing marginal return means every extra after number 1 is a little less good or a little less useful. So we sort of understand that in a practical sense, but it seems still very natural. And I'm using that term purposefully. It seems natural to us. Well, even if it's not as good, if it was amazing, I don't need a 10 out of a 10 experience. If it was a 7 out of 10, if it's a solid B+, I might as well do it again. He, however, understands there was something almost sacred about it, and that he was genuinely fulfilled the first time. After he ate that one fruit, he was not hungry. To eat the second fruit would have been only trying to recapture an experience. When he hit that bubble tree, he was fully refreshed. He didn't need another one. And if he went for another one, it would only be trying to recapture the experience. That seems very natural to us. But I think he would argue our nature is broken. We keep trying to recapture good things over and over again, and almost everything that we do has some element of mitigating future risk and recapturing past pleasure, even when we don't necessarily need it or want it.
Yeah.
It's almost an aside, but I think it's a deeply significant point. And if there's ever a place to take the blessings simply as they're given, with no expectation and no demand, receiving their fulfillment in gratitude and not instantly demanding extraneous more, then perhaps it's in a pristine new world.
Yeah.
All right. So we get kind of a lot of those meditations and thoughts about that particular experience, and it's repeated in a couple of ways, but something very significant happens to close off the book. What's this big significant change? It does become night, and he understands that night here is real night because of that firmament above him. There's no twilight, there's no starry sky. It's pitch black.
There's no moon, no star.
Right. Yeah, there's light and there's day, and that's all there is to it. And then the most significant thing happens here near the end of the book. What does he see? A person. He is not alone. For the first time, he has seen an actual being that he can identify as a person. He even calls it human-like. Like they're too far away and it's too much of a silhouette to really know. But this is a biped, human-like person that even from a distance, I can tell this is not a dragon or a dog or a frog-like thing falling in the rain. And this has kind of changed everything. The closer he gets, he notices a few things. Now, this person is on a different island than him. But within the waves, they kind of have a period of getting closer together. But even those waves, like when a wave comes, they're separated. When it goes down, they can see each other. When it comes up, separated. When it goes down, they see each other. What does this person look like? What can he tell? The closer they've gotten, the female. This is a female. It's definitely looks like a human. Now, appearances can be deceiving, and the outside didn't say anything about the inside, but I clearly identifies this as a woman. Anything noteworthy about this woman?
She's green.
She's green, first of all, like super green, like bright bottle green.
Yeah.
And she's large and she's beautiful. Even from a distance, he can tell that there is something pristine about her. So he's trying his best to get her attention. She actually comes onto her island. Did you catch this? Riding on the fish, like Aquaman on the back of a dolphin. As natural as it could be. And the other animals just sort of are around her. And I got a picture of like Snow White in the movie, when all the little forest creatures just kind of follow her around.
There's an innocence about her.
Yes, there is an innocence, and he even describes that, like when he does finally get her attention, how does she respond? She laughs, but the laugh is not malicious.
Yes, she laughs.
The innocent,
Yeah.
and it's full and it's complete, and when it's done, it's just over. So Ransom has now kind of formulated a plan. What's his plan? I've got to get over there. I'm pretty sure I've got to meet this person, and this is maybe why I've been sent here. This is the first person I've met. So it's not easy. They keep getting separated by the waves. She doesn't seem to really understand. She doesn't seem particularly concerned about his presence, let alone him getting over there. As a matter of fact, she's very, very excited and waving enthusiastically early on. And then what happens? They get just close enough. And what expression does he see?
A smile.
But the smile doesn't last. She's disappointed.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right.
So I'm assuming it's not just me, but we have all had that experience. You're out in a crowd or you're in a public place, whatever, and somebody waves at you and you wave back and they weren't waving at you. And you are just the biggest dummy, right? It's so embarrassing. You know, hey, and they're like,
Oh.
or you ever respond to a question that somebody has and you didn't see that they had like a Bluetooth in their ear and they were on their phone? That's super embarrassing. This woman was enthusiastically greeting Ransom while they were far away. But as soon as she got close enough to really perceive who he was, she was disappointed. He doesn't know what that means,
You know, I wonder.
but he does understand that it happened.
I wonder when I read that, she's green. She could, I suspect, see that he was not green,
Yes.
and yet she thought she recognized him. That seemed a little strange.
Yeah, well, I guess he really couldn't tell that she was green until they were close enough to really be able to see each other clearly. Because that didn't even come up until they're pretty close.
Yeah.
But there's something about her getting close enough to him that she's no longer enthusiastic that he's there. Doesn't seem to be malicious, but maybe she was waiting for someone. But it doesn't look like it was him.
No.
So she doesn't seem to be much help or particularly interested in him getting over to see her. She did laugh, and all the animals seem to be having a good time too. Does she understand his words? The old solar.
Yes.
I come in peace from another world. Does she understand and respond? What is peace? So yes, she understands,
Yeah.
but she also doesn't understand. I understand the language, but I don't understand the concept of peace, which is an interesting thing to ponder. There's a couple of people who might not understand the concept of peace. those who know nothing but war, and those who have never experienced it. Which do you think she is? The one who has never experienced it. If this is a brand new world, even Tom has described her as seemingly innocent. Perhaps she is innocent, but like real innocent with a capital I. If she gives no help to Ransom, he has to make this desperate swim as the islands separate, as darkness comes, and for the very first time, genuine fear, where he's not to the other island, but it's become pitch black, and there is absolutely and positively no way to know. But we end on what? He makes it.
That doesn't even say that he's on that specific island. He struggles to get on the land.
He does make it onto an island. We're going to assume, I think, he does make it on the one he needs to, but at least he's alive. He is safe, and he is very grateful, despite all the odds, to have finally made it onto that island. All right, any other thoughts before we close it up?
Yeah, one, I was surprised that the person that he encountered on the island looked like him,
Yes.
whereas his prior experience on the other planet, features were in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Why would she seem so visibly human, so identifiably like him, whereas all the Martians looked completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as human as she appears, even then, he's trying to keep in mind, look, she looks human, but I can't expect her to be human. And just in case I was confused, she is bright green.
Yeah.
So we don't really know yet, but it is interesting that there is something that appears so extremely identifiable about her form. And maybe that will become revealed later.
Mhm.
Anything else? Yep, she's very comfortable, and she walks on these islands like it's nothing. You know, Ransom has to struggle with the balance and the waves and everything else, but she is very clearly, this is her natural, truly natural environment. All right, I'm going to suggest that we absolutely read chapters 5 and 6 together. If you wanted to say let's do 3 again, that's fine, but I think 5 and 6 will leave us at a very good spot. Do you want to just do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
5 and 6 will give us plenty of story and leave on an excellent cliffhanger. So for next chapter, for next week, we will read chapters 5 and 6. All right, everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, see you guys later then, thanks.